Today, in the third video in my series on the American Transcendentalists, I am going to rant about a fellow ranter, Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau wrote his masterpiece, Walden, or A Life in the Woods, after spending 2 years, from July 4th, 1845 to September 6th, 1847, basically alone, living a life of labor and study, as his mentor Ralph Waldo Emerson put it, in a hut that he built on the shore of Walden Pond, about 2 miles from his hometown Concord, Massachusetts, which had a population of about 2,000 people when he lived there. Thoreau was about 28 years old when he decided to leave the town and hole up in the woods. And only 16 years later, at just 44 years old, he had died of tuberculosis. Only 8 years after Walden had been published. He writes, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Some critics have accused Thoreau of being insincere because some family and friends of his lived relatively close by. But let's keep in mind that Thoreau made no claims of pioneer toughness or hardship. Basically, he did not want to toil or keep up appearances any more than absolutely necessary. "My greatest skill," he writes, "has always been to want but little." Although he lived a life of voluntary solitude, involuntary simplicity, involuntary poverty in those 2 years, he did not deprive himself, for example, of visits. He got visits from this fascinating woodcutter who had a Jesuit education. He got visits from runaway slaves, from townspeople who wanted to check in on him, from this poet who, as he puts it, made that small house ring with boisterous mirth. And of course, he got visits from animals, from a squirrel, from wasps, from mosquitoes, from a hunting dog. These two colonies of ants wage war on the land that he squatted on. He writes this vivid correspondence from the battlefield. It might be the most memorable passage in the book. His writing on nature, especially near the end of the book, is just so jubilant. He's clearly inebriated by the world around him. By distancing himself from the pull and obligations of society, he is able to dwell more completely on the moment and on his surroundings. He claims to be writing for those who are discontented, who have accumulated dross and know not how to use it or get rid of it, and thus have forged golden or silver shackles, which cause them to live lives, as he famously puts it, of quiet desperation. When he points out the absurdity of contemporary American living, how overwrought and excessive and confining it was, and it's only gotten worse, that's what gives rise to the rants in Walden that I hope to give you a tiny taste of in this video. So, 10 juicy and sometimes hilarious rants from one of America's wisest and most sensible literary masters. Here goes. Rant number 1. How owning and keeping a house is tedious and endless work. To Thoreau, the perfect home is such a shelter as you would be glad to reach in a tempestuous night, containing all the essentials of a house and with nothing for housekeeping. He claims that it is a sign of an advanced civilization, that which has produced better dwellings without making them more costly. And then he adds that the cost of a thing is the amount of life which is required to be exchanged for it immediately or in the long run. That is, cash down or with a mortgage, and all of the sacrifices that come with paying a mortgage or keeping a house from deteriorating or getting messy or dirty. He writes hilariously about these 3 pieces of decorative limestone that he had on his desk until he was terrified, that's the word he uses, terrified to discover that they needed to be dusted daily. So he throws them out of his window in disgust. He can't imagine himself owning a furnished home because he would rather sit in the open air, for no dust gathers on the grass unless where man has broken ground. And then he culminates this rant with the following 2 sentences. We have built for this world a family mansion, and for the next a family tomb. The greatest works of art are the expression of man's struggle to free himself from this condition. Hence, Walden. Rant number 2, on the importance of a practical as well as a theoretical education, but practical in a general sense, not in terms of a specialty. I am going to read straight from the rant, but keep in mind that the rant goes on for much longer than this, okay? If I wished a boy to know something about the arts and sciences, I would not pursue the common course, to survey the world through a telescope or a microscope and never with his natural eye, to study chemistry and not learn how his bread is made, to discover new satellites to Neptune and not detect the motes in his eyes, or to what vagabond he is a satellite himself, or to be devoured by the monsters that swarm all around him while contemplating the monsters in a drop of vinegar? Which would have advanced the most at the end of a month? The boy who had made his own jackknife from the ore which he had dug and smelted, reading as much as would be necessary for this, or the boy who had attended the lectures on metallurgy at the Institute in the meanwhile, and had received a Rogers penknife from his father? Which would be most likely to cut his fingers? See, practical as well as theoretical. Rant number 3. On the importance of the quality of information that we receive and not of the speed with which it is communicated. Considering that this book was first published 170 years ago, in 1854, it remains astonishingly relevant. He writes about how our inventions and our modern improvements are wont, W-O-N-T, are wont to be pretty toys, which distract our attention from serious things. They are but improved means to an unimproved end, an end which was already too easy to arrive at. We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate. As if, he writes, the main objective were to speak fast and not to speak sensibly. He points out how hardly a man takes a half-hour nap after dinner, but when he wakes, he holds up his head and asks, "What's the news?" These days, when we wake up for a nap, we roll over, pick up our phones, and start to scroll through Twitter. Thoreau even questions the importance of the post office. I never received more than 1 or 2 letters in my life that were worth the postage, he writes. Or, what news? How much more important to know what that is which was never old. Rant number 4, how we should commemorate our cultures with thought and manners rather than with monuments. I'm going to read a little bit here, okay? To what end, pray, he writes, is so much stone hammered? Nations are possessed with an insane ambition to perpetuate the memory of themselves by the amount of hammered stone they leave. What if equal pains were taken to smooth and polish their manners? One piece of good sense would be more memorable than a monument as high as the moon. Or he adds, how much more admirable the Bhagavad Gita, that's a Hindu holy book, than all the ruins in the East. As for the pyramids, he writes, there is nothing to wonder at them so much as the fact that so many men could be found degraded enough to spend their lives constructing a tomb for some ambitious booby, whom it would have been wiser and manlier to have drowned in the Nile and then given his body to the dogs. Many are concerned, he continues, about the monuments of the West and the East, to know who built them. For my part, I should like to know who in those days did not build them, who were above such trifling. With Walden, Thoreau has written a monument to self-reliance, economy, and nonconformist thought. Rant number 5, on the burden of possessions. We have already seen what Thoreau did with those 3 pieces of decorative limestone on his desk, how he threw them out of his window in disgust when he realized that they had to be dusted every day. He also wrote this: "A lady once offered me a mat, but as I had no room to spare within the house, nor time to spare within or without to shake it, I declined it, preferring to wipe my feet on the sod before my door." And then this great final line to the passage: "It is best to avoid the beginnings of evil." Thoreau tells us about this Mexican Indian tribe that upon celebrating the Feast of First Fruits would provide the tribe with new clothes, pots, pans, household items, furniture, and then they would collect all the old stuff and the old provisions, grain and whatnot, and then mix it with the town garbage and they'd burn it. Then the tribe would fast for 4 days, and they would produce a new fire, and that fire would be shared in each home, and only then would the tribe begin to rejoice in and partake in the new harvest, sharing it with visitors and neighbors. Thoreau writes, "I have scarcely heard of a truer sacrament, that is, as the dictionary defines it, outward invisible sign of an inward and spiritual grace." Thoreau urges us, not to become the tools of our tools. Basically, the less attached we are to our possessions, the less they own us, rather than the other way around. Rant number 6, on how spareness, simplicity, solitude, and idleness can amplify how we see the world. Basically, by ridding ourselves of unnecessary possessions, obligations, commotion, information, and company, we become our own society, and our very lives become our amusement and theater. "Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in," Thoreau writes. Or how about this for rant-like rhetoric, expressing how too many people get saturated with each other's company. "We meet at meals 3 times a day and give each other a new taste of the old musty cheese that we are." Basically, alone in the woods, the show comes to him with fireworks. And I mean with fireworks, he describes Walden Pond thawing in the spring, or the crackling company of his hearth fire, or how all the movements of a squirrel, even in the most solitary recesses of the forest, imply spectators as much as those of a dancing girl, or even the drama of coming home after dark on a pitch black night, or getting disoriented in a landscape whitewashed by snow. Thoreau is a guy who, because he didn't let his life get frittered away by detail, could be as much affected by the faint hum of a mosquito making its invisible and unimaginable tour through his apartment at earliest dawn as by any trumpet that ever sang of fame. Obviously, I'm quoting him. I'm sure that solitude and simplicity cultivated him as a poet. Rant number 7, on the impertinence of naming the features of some landscape after ourselves. There are 3 consecutive chapters in Walden, right in the middle of the book, that are tough going. The bean fields, the village, and the ponds. They kind of read like a mix of some local history, a 19th century almanac, and some topographical text. But if I hadn't read them, I wouldn't have had the pleasure of reading his rant on Flint's Pond, or rather on the farmer who had the gall to name the pond after himself. "Flint's Pond," he writes, "such is the poverty of our nomenclature. What right had the unclean and stupid farmer whose farm abutted on this sky water, whose shores he had ruthlessly laid bare, to give his name to it? Some skinflint who loved better the reflecting surface of a dollar, or the bright scent in which you could see his own brazen face, who regarded even the wild ducks who settled in it as trespassers, who would fain have exhausted the waters within it, who would have drained and sold it for the mud at its bottom, who would carry his God to market if he could get anything for him. Poor Flint, he goes down in history as the butt of a first-rate rant. If the fairest features of the landscape are to be named after men, concludes Thoreau, let them be the noblest and worthiest men alone. Rant number 8. Let's leave the philanthropy to the saints and just do what we do best at our very best. Thoreau writes, you must have a genius for charity as much as for anything else. He writes, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. And it may be that he who bestows the largest amount of time and money on the needy is doing the most by his mode of life to produce that misery which he strives in vain to relieve. Thoreau believes that philanthropy too often is born of our own cast-off griefs that we then call sympathy, and that instead we should impart our courage and not our despair, our health and ease and not our disease. And here's where he launches off into poetry. I do not value chiefly a man's uprightness and benevolence, which are, as it were, his stem and leaves. Those plants of whose greenness withered we make herb tea for the sick serve but humble use and are most employed by quacks. I want the flower and fruit of a man, that some fragrance be wafted over from him to me and some ripeness flavor our intercourse. And finally, these words of counsel. Do not stay to be an overseer of the poor, but endeavor to become one of the worthies of the world. A bit controversial, but in his prose, it reads authentic and true. Rant number 9, on overeating and on overcoming our carnivorous instincts, let's say. This rant could rankle. In a chapter titled Higher Laws, Thoreau writes, he who distinguishes the true flavor in his food can never be a glutton. He who does not cannot be otherwise. Then he goes on, a Puritan may go to his brown bread crust with as gross an appetite as any alderman to his turtle. And then he concludes, not the food which entereth into the mouth defileth a man, but the appetite with which it is eaten. He seems to want to convert us all into Epicureans. The gross feeder, he writes, is a man in the larva state, and there are whole nations in that condition. Nations without fancy or imagination, whose vast abdomens betray them. As someone who captured, harvested, picked and prepared his own food, he claimed that meat was unclean and that it cost more than it came to. Cost more than it came to. That is a typical Thoreau line. He writes, every man who has ever been earnest to preserve his higher or poetic faculties in the best condition has been particularly inclined to abstain from animal food. And by animal food, he means meat. But he also adds that they abstain from much food of any kind. And then finally he says, I have no doubt that it is part of the destiny of the human race in its gradual improvement to leave off eating animals as surely as the savage tribes left off eating each other. One wonders what type of rant Thoreau would come up with these days when the vast majority of the food production is industrialized. Rant number 10, good people. I've saved this one for last because of its relevance to book rants, on how awake we have to be for intellectual labor, which starts with reading. In the chapter titled What I Lived For, Thoreau writes, The millions are awake for physical labor, but only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. To be awake is to be alive. And then he writes, to read true books in a true spirit will task the reader more than any exercise which the customs of the day esteem. It requires a training such as the athletes underwent, the steady intention of almost the whole life to this object. To Thoreau, reading is not that which lulls us as a luxury and suffers the noble faculties to sleep the while, but what we have to stand on tiptoe to read and devote our most alert and wakeful hours to. He acknowledges the relative rarity of serious readers. He writes, one who has just come from reading perhaps one of the best English books will find how many with whom he can converse about it, implying that many is actually quite few. If you have gotten this far in this video, okay, you are one of the few with whom I can converse about Walden. Perhaps you have already read it, perhaps you are thinking about reading it, perhaps you're thinking about reading it a second time. I will say one final thing about it, creating a variation on Thoreau's famous criticism, it costs more than it comes to. If you read Walden, fully awake, fully alert, and fully on tiptoe, then it will come to far, far more than it cost you in every sense of that term, in every way that we can possibly understand value.